Podcast, the one and only law enforcement podcast that's tackling critical policing and social justice issues and provides insights into the daily realities of policing with your host, Chief Virgil Green.
Killing in Coral Springs is reverberating around Florida, including here in Tampa Bay. The city's Vice Mayor, Nancy Mateo-Bowen, was found dead in her home, and her husband is now charged with murder.
Yeah, people across the state knew her because she was about to announce a run for Congress. And Fox 13's Evan Axelwink is here now with this horrific story.
Yeah, horrific. Linda, Haley, even when you talk to people who knew her very well in politics, they had no idea that there was apparently a violent situation blooming. She was considered a rising star in Democratic politics and had already contributed to her community in many ways. Mateo-Bowen doing what she loved.
Someone who was really committed and believed in what this community could be. And that's how Nancy moved. She showed up for every fight.
The two-term city commissioner was an environmental scientist by trade and a member of 10 community boards. She was also the head of the Florida Democratic Party's outreach efforts to Haitian Americans. And she was on the verge of announcing a run for Congress in South Florida.
She had so much light and so much hope and just the desire to serve her community. And that's really what she put front and center.
She was found dead at her home Wednesday morning by Coral Springs police, who went for a wellness check. Her husband, 40-year-old Stephen Bowen, was taken into custody.
A lot of professional women who are experiencing domestic violence keep their private life very hidden because there are repercussions, right, for their career advancement.
This is only the latest blow for her family. In December, her younger brother, Donovan, killed himself. His family blames his experience of surviving the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School as the catalyst for his own mental health challenges.
Nancy's one of those people that just never stopped smiling. She was so focused on serving her community and being a role model for others that despite that heavy loss, she never slowed down.
That is especially on issues she cared about, like the environment, reproductive rights, and health care. She was also known in Coral Springs for digging into the details of policy, especially when it comes to local water and conservation issues.
You talk about a light being dim. Let's talk about a community that has gone dark.
There is a vigil for her this Friday night in Coral Springs where her memory is going to be honored, and also her friends across the state say there are going to be more concerted efforts to honor her political legacy as well. And of course, domestic violence counselors say it's never too soon to reach out if you or a loved one may be in danger. Linda, Haley.
All right, Evan. Thank you.
Hey, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining You and the Law podcast tonight. We've definitely got a very informative topic that we're going to be talking about tonight. And there's a conversation that we don't have enough in our communities. And when we do have it, it's often whispered, avoided, or buried under layers of discomfort. Because behind too many closed doors, there is a different story unfolding, a story where pain goes unspoken, where trauma goes untreated, where depression wears the mask of anger, and where emotional wounds left unchecked don't just stay internally, they spill over. So today we're going to be having that conversation. We're going to be talking about mental health. We're going to be talking about domestic violence. We're going to be talking about responsibility. And most importantly, we're going to talk about change, because being strong isn't about silence. Being strong isn't about doing the work to heal before your pain becomes someone else's. There's a conversation. This conversation is about truth. This conversation is about accountability. And this conversation is about breaking cycles so the next generation doesn't have to carry what we have refused to confront. So let's get into it. And tonight I've got two guests who are joining me on the podcast. Let me bring my guest on. This is Candy, and let me bring on my next guest, who is who is a retired major with the Des Moines, Iowa Police Department. And we've got some history right here with with the major. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. And Candy, you're a domestic violence survivor and a domestic violence advocate, and you are also I'm gonna say the CEO of Aunt Mom's tribe?
Aunt Mom Basic
Aunt
Tribe.
Mom Basic Tribe, yeah, out of Arkansas. So, ladies, thank you for joining me tonight in this topic that, again, as I stated, is something that we don't talk about a lot. And the first video was definitely a tragic incident that happened in Florida. And, this month of April, ladies, has been a very violent month related to domestic violence that involves Black men. And I think we need to have that conversation about what's going on. And I know, we don't have all the answers. We're going to have a conversation about it, but you all bring so much knowledge to this conversation. And so, Candy, we'll start with you. We'll let you introduce yourself and tell our listeners who you are and what you do, and then we'll turn it over to the major.
I'm Helenia Candi Valencino. I am the owner of Aunt Mom Basic Tribe Foundation. It was founded in 2004. I was the neighborhood mom and took care of everyone's kids. I'm also a domestic violence survivor, where my partner at that time beat me with a baseball bat and my 2-year-old son. And I woke up in the hospital and he didn't get to wake up. So I advocate for domestic violence. I tell everybody run. And that's just what I do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Major Parker, thanks for coming on the You and the Law podcast.
Thank you for having me again, Chief. So Major Parker, my first name is Lily, 27-year veteran with the Des Moines, Iowa Police Department. Let's see, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Iowa, a master's from Drake University, and I am ABD for my doctorate, so all but dissertation from my doctorate in criminal justice. I currently have a LLC, a consulting company called LMM. My maiden name is Miller, so it's the Lily, my middle name May, last name Miller, Consulting LLC. So plan on doing some consulting here down the line, but I am currently retired from the police department. And when I saw the topic, when I looked at your podcast title, and I was telling you just shortly before we started, I was actually a counselor for a domestic violence shelter prior to becoming a police officer. And you, of course, did not know that, Chief.
No, I didn't. No, no. And again, I think, your experience in law enforcement and also dealing with domestic violence in the police department, and Candy being a domestic violence survivor and being an advocate, you two bring so much knowledge to the conversation. And one of the things hopefully we can unpack in this hour is to just talk about, obviously there are signs that these things are happening in the home, but nobody is saying anything. I want to go back to what took place. I'm not sure how familiar you are, both of you all are, with the incident that took place in Florida with the vice mayor there. But her and her husband had the perfect life. I mean, there was no kids. She was an up and coming person in politics in the Democratic Party. As you heard, she was getting ready to announce she was going to be running for Congress. But obviously, there were some things that were going on inside the home. And now, after her death, people are talking about it. And so I think the conversation I want to have with you two is, how do you break this stigma, this cycle where women they're not talking about it? And I'm not saying all women, but there are some, but it happens more often than what it should.
I'll start, Chief. So, what you're doing today, because it's awareness. How do we make it okay to say something? Because, when I grew up in my household, there wasn't domestic violence. However, whatever happened in the house stayed in the house.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's how we were brought up. We were indoctrinated into that. Whatever happens in this house, it stays in this house, regardless of what it is. And so I think we need to make that not okay. because when things are happening in the house, sometimes we need help from someone outside the house. But the knowledge and information sharing, Candy, your organization dealing with being an advocate for victims of domestic violence, that's tremendous. I mean, coming from you, you probably have more information and knowledge than most counselors would, because you have more information when you live a thing as
Yes.
opposed to when you study a thing, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
yeah. So that's my take on that.
My first thing that I try to teach, and it's not just women,
Mhm.
I try to teach everyone. The first step to domestic violence is isolation.
Yeah.
They will isolate you from your friends, your family, everything. It's just all about them. They can go wherever they want, but you can't do anything. In my situation, he would sit at my job while I was at work, and I'd get off work, and I would it would be an argument all the way home, and you get home, and we had a bathroom. This is a horrible story, but we had a bathroom that had no windows. All it had was an entry door. And I would go in the bathroom, and he would time me and say, "Is someone in that bathroom with you?" It became like, now you look back, he was definitely delusional. But as you said, we grew up in an era where this is normal. We saw grandma head knocked through the washing machine. So we thought, this is normal, but it's not normal. And I teach the girls now, if they try to isolate you and the first time they hit you, it's time to leave. Even my little nieces, I have a 10-year-old niece, and she goes, "This little boy hit me. He likes me." I go, "No, he don't like you." And we got to teach our kids that, oh, it's just he hit you because he like you. No, if he hit you, leave that situation alone right then and there, because that escalates as you get older.
Yeah. Well, and and as you both have mentioned, I just think, the generation that we were brought up in, your parents said, your parents or your grandparents, you heard that whatever happens in the home stays in the home. You don't talk about it. And I don't think we're the Black culture is the only one that has that, but it's almost in every other culture, especially when you get into, people from, India or South Africa and those type of demographics, that there's just something about whatever, even related to domestic violence. And Major Parker, me and Candy have had this conversation on the podcast before. And I really kind of get onto this because it is here's a group of people who have a voice, but they only use that voice on a platform that benefits them. But when it's talking about domestic violence, they turn a blind eye to it. And Candy knows what I'm talking about. It's the
You see, I started smiling automatically. I already knew where you were going with this.
It's the Black churches.
Yeah.
It is the Black churches. There's just something about Black pastors, and now you're starting to see it showing up on TV shows where I saw a segment on, I want to say it was the Tyler Perry show, the Pains, where Miss Ella was trying to tell the pastor that this other church member was being that the deacon was jumping on his wife. And he was like, "Oh no, that's impossible. I've known Deacon so-and-so forever. He's been a great deacon." Well, I mean, you're talking about this man as if he is, but you've got a woman telling you that his wife is in an abusive relationship, but he's dismissing it. And basically again, this is portrayed in a TV show, but this happens in real life, ladies, where when somebody goes to try to get help and you've got somebody basically telling you, "No, you don't want to do that because you're going to get brother so-and-so or deacon so-and-so is going to end up in jail, and that's not good." Candy, we talked about this. How do you is that a conversation that you just have to have with a pastor who is just that determined not to really look at the lady as the victim and her kids to say, what can we really do to help you, versus he's more concerned about the man?
Well, you already know what I think about that. And well, you really do, and we'll keep beating this dead horse. I think a lot of that is the way we were raised, and a lot of things that we do as adults are trauma responses.
Mhm.
And as far as a pastor not listening to one of his members saying, "Look, she's being abused," you might want to think about what's going on in a pastor house.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and the stigma behind telling somebody, that's another trauma response too. Because as a child, when you went to your mother and was like, Uncle so and so did something to me, and the first thing they said was, "You better be quiet, because if you tell Uncle so and so going to jail, and we might not have no food to eat next week." So
Exactly.
a lot of
Yeah.
that is a trauma response that, we gotta stay quiet. And if we tell somebody, it's gonna hurt the whole family. And we gotta get out of that. And I've started it in my household. I tell my girls, we don't have secrets over here.
Yeah.
I don't care who told you. Don't go tell nobody. You better come tell me what's going on. I don't care if it hurt my feelings. I want to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so Major Park, I want to let you know one of the things I try to do is just keep it real on the podcast.
Okay.
Don't try to sugarcoat anything, because again, I just think people need to hear just the authentic voices of people who have, I've never been, I've responded to calls related to domestic violence, but Candy is a survivor, and you and I are coming from the law enforcement field. And I just think people really want to hear the truth and not try to, make excuses for anything. So hopefully that's okay with you, because again,
Oh yeah, for sure.
because again, I just think, and the things that have happened this past month with what happened in Florida, what happened in Virginia, and just what happened in Baton Rouge this past week, it just brings so much. To me, this really needs to be a national conversation that somebody is carrying as to what's going on in the Black community, because, you don't really hear, you've heard of a lot of incidents with Black men, domestic violence, but now we're talking about committing suicide, and now you've got a man who killed 7 of his kids. It's just unthinkable. Something that we're going to be talking about later on in the podcast. But Major, what's some of the things that you've experienced in your role is being in the Des Moines area? How prevalent was domestic violence there that you all had to deal with?
So domestic calls for service were our largest percentage of calls for service. So domestic was huge here.
Okay.
That was the majority of our calls. And you also run into situations where when the officer responds to the call, they sometimes don't believe the victim.
Exactly.
So then the victim is like, well, I'm not, what am I going to call them for?
Yeah.
They're just gonna come over here and they're not going to do anything. And you would hear an officer say, "Oh, it's such and such again," and as if it's not okay to keep calling. And so if they're saying that, that's how they're responding to the person when they go to the home, is like, "You're calling again. And I don't know why we're going over there. He's just going to stay with her. She's just going to stay with him. And we're going to divide them or split them up for the day or the night. But we'll be right back over here next week or tomorrow." So, and that's a big piece too. I mean, the training for officers on how they respond to the calls. Ironically, that's how I even applied to be a police officer, because I was a counselor. I had lots of my clients complaining about the way the officers treated them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my son's godfathers was a Des Moines police officer, and he's now retired as well. But I would always complain to him, what kind of police do you have over there? What are these cops doing? Why aren't they helping these victims? And on and on and on. And one time he said to me, and he said, "Well, we're hiring."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I hope you hire people,
Yeah.
people that are willing to help." And he said, "Well, instead of you calling me, always complaining." And now he was a sounding board. He wasn't saying you can't call me, But he
Yeah.
said, instead of calling, why don't you help be part of the solution and not part of the problem?
Yeah.
And I was like, nah, I can't be a cop. I like people. I hug people.
Yeah.
I try to solve problems. I said, I can't be a police officer. But, we just kind of had some conversation about that. I mean, even literally for my first interview, I was there late. I got there late with the police because I was so used to being on my schedule as a counselor. So,
Yeah.
but I think it's the way that officers respond when someone calls for help. I'm not saying that every officer responds like that, but you do run into some officers that don't respond the way that they should.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, Major Parker, because I think that's another big part of this conversation, especially on the law enforcement side, because you and I both know there's a lack of training when it comes to training officers how to deal with people who are dealing with trauma and how to deal with not just the mother but the kids as well. And you've just got some officers who are just very shallow.
Mhm.
And like you said, it's not all, but again, I just think and I've said this before, we spend so much time at a gun range trying to be proficient with a firearm, then we spend time on training on de-escalation, training on domestic violence, training on mental health. But man, if you say, hey, we're going to go to the range to shoot, man, you got everybody lined up and everybody's trying to get that 100. But when it comes time to go to a training for domestic violence, you got people like, do I really have to go? I mean, again, like you said, I mean, in Des Moines, that is one of the highest priority calls that you all responded to with domestic violence. So why not try to get the training that you need to be able to help somebody and get them the resources that they need to get? And oftentimes, and we've seen this before where women just shut down because I'm dealing with a man who's not listening to me. I'm dealing with my husband who's been abusive or a boyfriend who's been abusive to me. Now I got to deal with this smart ass cop who really doesn't care about me. But like you said, people will say, well, I've been to this address, I don't know how many times. They're not going to do anything. And as you and I both know, and Candy, I'm pretty sure you know this as well, domestic violence calls that police officers respond to are pretty high danger calls for a police officer because a lot of police officers do get either seriously injured or killed responding or dealing with a domestic violence call, because oftentimes one or the other is going to turn on the police officer and it ends up in a deadly situation. So again, I just think training is a big piece of this conversation as well. But I think when it comes to what's going on in the Black communities, there has to be a real conversation, not just around Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but every single day about what's going on in our communities.
Yeah, Chief, as you may know, some agencies, and this agency here now, they've partnered with mental health workers, and so we call them mobile crisis. And they go out and assist the officer with not just mental health, but even some domestic things after the officer has made sure that it's okay for this civilian to go in. So, and I think that's tremendous because you talked about the mental health training, but the officers, so many of them being so shallow that's probably, and it's not something that they want to do. Right. Like I didn't sign up for that. You hear that.
Exactly.
That's not what I signed up for. I'm going to the range. Right.
Yeah. Well, so Candy, as being a survivor and being an advocate for domestic violence, when you have these conversations with somebody who is experiencing domestic violence, what are some of the things that you can do to encourage this mom to get out of the situation she's in? But I want to ask you this question: what if there's not any resources there? What happens then?
And that's the biggest issue with domestic violence is the resources, because a lot of time when a man is abusing a woman, that's the first thing. That's another thing that he does. He controls the finances.
Yeah.
And what I tell a woman is make a plan, because if you ever saw the statistics, most women die trying to leave a domestic violence situation.
They do.
And so the first thing that they have to do is make a plan. And a lot of times the family members don't want to be a part of that plan because they don't want Jim to come to their house and shoot it up. So they have to make a bigger plan. They have to decide, are they going to go to a shelter? And then that's stigma. No one wants to go to a shelter with their kids. And so when it's serious, they have to come up with a plan to get out of there. And they have to do it fast because that is the critical moment of escalation.
Yeah. So, you just mentioned going to a shelter. And I think a lot of women think of, now I've got to leave the comfort of my home.
Mhm.
I've got to go to a shelter where I don't know the living conditions of that shelter. Or they may have heard some horror stories about, women's shelters where and all of that is something that now you got to think about. Do I want to leave my home? Will I be able to take my car? I mean, there's just so many different things that's going on. And I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I just don't think there's been a lot of resources, a lot of money put into women's shelters that are isolated, where people feel comfortable, people know that they're safe, and it's not somewhere where you're walking into like you're going to Motel 6. It's something that's it's not going to be your home, but at least it's something comfortable for, especially if you've got 4 or 5 kids with you. I mean, and there again, do these shelters take in consideration where it may be a mom with 8 kids? What do you do with 8 kids? And so that's a whole nother another dynamics of things that you have to deal with.
And Chief, that creates other dynamics. So when I was at the shelter, I had a mother and she had 6 children. And so when she finally decided that she was okay leaving and came to the shelter with her 6 children, finding housing in the state of Iowa, you can only have 2 people per room if you have bedrooms. So 2 people per bedroom. Even very small babies, so now she's got to have at least a 4-bedroom apartment. Now, how do you afford that?
Yeah.
So there's so many things that happen with that. And you're correct when you say the shelter not looking like a Motel 6, because, most shelters are not going to be the most comfortable environment. You may be sharing a room with another person and their children, or whatever the case may be, just because, there could be a capacity. And then when we had men victims, we would actually put them up in a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously we didn't want them housed in the same shelter environment as the women, but you'd almost want the hotel room.
Yeah.
Because it was like at a Hampton Inn.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. So
yeah. Well, and I want to just make even though we're talking about, the topic tonight is behind closed doors, the conversation we avoid about Black men and domestic violence. Men are victims of domestic violence themselves. I don't, the statistics are much higher for women to be abused and fatally abused by men than it is for men to be, fatally abused or abused by a woman in a relationship. But I think, the conversation about what has happened over the last month you've got she's a vice mayor. She's living in a very comfortable home. Obviously, her husband is doing well, but now you're talking about people who are professionals. And, we're talking about, she was a professional, the lieutenant governor and his wife, both professionals. I believe the lieutenant governor's wife was a doctor. So we're talking about professional people who are dealing with domestic violence in the home. And we know that's a whole nother set of dynamics because it's so much private. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want that to interfere in our careers. And I could just assume, and I think some information has definitely come out since the tragic death of the vice mayor in Coral Springs is that there was some domestic violence that had been going on in the home, but she hadn't said anything. And the family members knew about it, but really nobody had said anything. And so how do you break that cycle, especially with professional people who have their careers that they're really thinking about?
That's a really good question. Breaking the cycle. It sounds easy. Like, I can't stand to hear people say, why don't she just leave? If it was that easy, no one would experience domestic violence. It is very hard, and especially as a professional, is what she's thinking about, or he's thinking about, if anybody knew that I'm not this strong woman, that he's at home smacking me upside my head, they would look at me different. It's definitely a big stigma behind domestic violence.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think that's why that story and the incident with the lieutenant governor both really sticks out, because we're talking about people who are at the highest level of their professional careers, and there is domestic violence going on in the home, and nobody absolutely has a clue that these things are happening. I mean, she's going to work, he's going to work, neighbors are not really thinking anything, but there is something is going on behind the doors. Somebody knows something, but people are good at hiding those things, whether it be trying to cover up a bruise or something like that. But again, we're talking about how do you prevent these things from happening and breaking this cycle to where it doesn't happen to the next person.
I think it's all about the conversation of breaking the cycle, is having a conversation with these young ladies. As you know, once a year we do a tea and conversation on topics like this with girls ages 6 to 18 years old. And what I say to every one of them, and I say it often, if a man tell you, I'll kill you, or if I can't have you, nobody else can, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Because this is the biggest one. This is what men do that abuse women. I'll kill myself, and it's gonna be your fault. And what happens there, and what I say is, if he'll kill himself, he'll kill you.
Yeah.
So that means that you should not be in that situation.
Yeah.
And the awareness that domestic violence is not just the physical. I mean, there's the verbal, that's the mental, helping people to understand, young men and young women, that if somebody's talking to you sideways all the time, it's a problem.
It
That's
is.
where you start this isolation, but they start first with the mental, right? They get you kind of locked in with the mental. And then, trying to diminish you and knock down your self-esteem, all of those things. Who's going to want you anyway?
Right.
Nobody else wants you,
Okay.
You're doing good with me. Where are you going to go? Nobody, those things, but messing with that mental capacity, so that people understand that, it's not just the bruise that you can see. It's
what you can't see.
That's right.
Yeah, it's what you can't see. And I'm gonna say this as a man, and I think the one thing that we don't do a good enough job in the Black community and the Black men's is have this conversation among Black men's. I think that's where it really starts at, having these conversations with Black pastors, with people, professional people, everybody should be a part of this conversation, not just because you're a professional person or you well known in the community. We need to have these conversations. And again, I just think somebody has to step up and say, we're going to organize and we're going to put on some kind of, platform or something to talk about domestic violence. Because again, you may show up at this meeting and you're doing the same thing in the home that's being talked about. How do you, I don't know of too many men who will admit that amongst a lot of other people, that they are in an abusive relationship and they are the abuser, especially if they're a professional person. We've seen this in law enforcement as well, where the domestic violence rate and divorce rate in law enforcement is high because of just the type of work that men and women do in law enforcement, they both become victims of domestic violence in the home. And Major Parker, I've seen it, especially in the last couple of years, here in Oklahoma and in Texas, where several agencies have had multiple incidents where they've lost members of their department to suicide because it was related to domestic violence. And it's, again, if you are in this profession and you're going to training related to domestic violence, but here you've got something going on inside of your home, you can't go in somebody else's home and try to help them fix their problems when you've got the same problems going on inside your home. I've said that over several decades, you cannot do that. You can't fix somebody else's problem when you've got your own problems.
But then you have agencies that don't even address it.
You do.
If they can hide it and tuck it under the rug because officer so-and-so is doing such and such to his wife, but they're so concerned. Some agencies are so concerned with the public perception.
Exactly.
If something's going on in that agency. So
Yeah.
You just run into a lot of different things that just make this a really good topic for conversation and really educating people. I think it has to start young.
Yeah.
Candy, I'm not sure what your age group is for the people that you actually work with. What's the youngest age of people that you work with?
I want them to come in at 4. And I say that because these kids these days are not our 4. These 4-year-olds come in on a whole lot more than what they
should
know.
Yeah.
and I think and the ladies that I try to work with, they have a lot of kids, or they're used to being in areas and things where they shouldn't be, and to them it's normal to be abused. It's like they've seen it growing up, and every man that they get with do it to them. I had one girl that tell me, if he don't hit me, he don't love me.
Oh, wow.
So it becomes normal. It becomes their everyday life.
Yeah.
It's hard to see.
Yeah. Well, hey, ladies, I want to let everybody know, if you just now tuning into the podcast, tonight's topic is behind closed doors, the conversation we avoid about Black mental health and domestic violence. And I've got on 2 guests tonight, Candy, who is a domestic violence survivor and advocate, and the founder of Aunt Mom's Basic Tribe Foundation. And we've got Major Parker, retired with the Des Moines, Iowa Police Department, on the podcast. And so, ladies, I want to show this next video. This next video is of the tragic incident that took place with the former Lieutenant Governor of Virginia.
On the potential warning signs before a shocking murder-suicide in Fairfax County. Former Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax is accused of shooting and killing his estranged wife, Serena, and then himself at their Annandale home. Their 2 children were inside at the time and called 911. New documents describe the couple as being in the middle of a contentious divorce. A judge overseeing the split recently wrote that Fairfax's, quote, isolation, drinking, and a lack of participation in family life are manifestations of what seemed to be a sense of fatalism and hopelessness. The judge also said tensions in the home had been extremely high for a while and ordered Fairfax to move out by the end of April. Court documents show Serena is the one who filed for divorce. She testified that they separated nearly 2 years ago despite still living together. It's referred to as same roof separation, which is allowed under Virginia law. We asked an expert about that tonight.
In Virginia, they can live under the same roof and still be separated. So one might live in the basement, and one may live in the bedroom, but they wouldn't share bedrooms. They wouldn't share meals. They wouldn't do laundry together.
Serena also testified that her husband drank daily. A judge said that Fairfax's mental and emotional health suffered after multiple setbacks, including a big political fall. He was only the second African-American elected to statewide office in Virginia, and many expected him to eventually become governor of the state. However, that all came crashing down amidst multiple allegations of sexual assault in 2019, which he declined and was never charged for.
It is very important for truth to be established, and where sexual assault has in fact occurred, for resources and assistance to be provided to survivors. As the person accused, I also deserve to be treated fairly, seriously, and respectfully. A just society requires fairness and due process.
The accusations caused many of his political allies to cut ties with him, and his failed campaign for governor in 2021 essentially brought a close to his political career. Today, the Fairfax County Police Chief called it a fall from grace.
A relatively high-profile family that seemingly had a lot of things going in their favor. So tragic for the children to lose both parents. Extra tragic for them to actually be in the home when it occurred.
Now, the shootings happened shortly after midnight, and police believe that Fairfax killed his wife in the basement before turning the gun on himself in the main bedroom upstairs. FCPD says they have responded to prior domestic-related calls at the home. The most recent was in January. Now, this case is bringing new awareness to domestic violence, and we spoke with a local organization that helps people get out of unhealthy relationships.
I think it's important for people to know that when they're thinking of leaving, when they've recently left, or they're recently separated, that's actually the most dangerous time. That's when someone might feel they're losing their power and losing their control, and things can escalate.
So what can be done to protect the victims of domestic violence? Well, the governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, just signed a series of new bills into law earlier this week, which we've laid out in more detail on WJLA.com. One of those is designed to establish a clear process for removing firearms from people who have a protection order against them. Another aims to close the intimate partner loophole for abusers convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence. There's also a bill that closes the so-called boyfriend loophole that allows the court to take a firearm away from someone convicted of domestic violence, including those in romantic relationships who are not married. If you need help, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text the word START to 88788. That hotline is available around the clock. And if you're struggling with your mental health, you can also call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. That is available 24/7.
You know, ladies, one of the things that I wanted to kind of go back on is the fact that the wife, that they were in the same home together. And Candy, I think you had made a comment earlier about, you know, people not wanting to leave the home because of whatever circumstances. But here's a situation where, I don't know the financial of the husband and the wife, but clearly somebody could have had the finances to leave the home. I mean, obviously they had kids. But there are just some things that were there, even with somebody who has the financial, the money and the means to do so. They don't. They're coexisting in the same home, and apparently, the former lieutenant governor, alcoholism became an issue. Domestic violence was going on in the home. And I'll say this: I think now they're saying that they passed some laws in the state of Virginia. And I think one of the laws that really need to be passed in a lot of states is if you know that there's domestic violence going on in the home, and I'm gonna ask you this question before I make my comment: should a person be held to the same standards if you know that there's some kind of sexual molestation going on where you don't report it? Should there be something that if you know that there's domestic violence going on, should you have an obligation to report that yourself?
How could you? I mean, if you are terrified of a person that is beating you every day, how can
Yeah.
you be held responsible
Well,
for trying to save your own life?
no, I'm not saying the
But, well,
person.
somebody else's, yeah.
I'm saying somebody else. I'm
Okay.
saying, let's say the next door neighbor, or let's say a family member. I'm not even going to say a next door neighbor. Let's say a family member knows that there is constant domestic violence going on inside the home, and you fail to report that. Now we're getting into a conversation about holding somebody else accountable and responsible for failure to report. Just kind of like if a teacher knows that there is something going on with this student inside the home and you fail to report that, you can be held accountable for that. And would that change people's minds to say, well, I've got a duty to report?
No, I don't believe it would.
Okay.
A lot of people that are mandated reporters don't report the things that they need to report. I
Well,
mean,
you're right about that.
it sounds good. You know, you're a mandated reporter. If you don't report this, you can get in trouble. But a lot of times with domestic violence, even with your next door neighbor, they do this every day. You can set your clock by it. At 8 o'clock, he's going to come in and you're going to hear him screaming. By 10, you're going to hear her screaming.
Yeah.
And people tend to say, it's not my business.
Yeah, because what goes on in somebody's home is not my business. Like we stated at the top of the podcast, is that we've been raised that what goes on inside your home, that's private.
Right.
It's not for the next door neighbor to know, and even the mother and the father. It's not even for them to really even know.
Right.
But what happens in the end, so tragically, what happened in Florida and then what happened in Virginia, is that somebody is murdered. And, the case in Virginia, the kids are in the home. Can you imagine hearing a gunshot? Now you're going down to the basement and you're finding your mom, and then you have to go upstairs and you're finding your dad, who is a self-inflicted gunshot wound. That right there, I don't know how. I mean, ladies, how do kids process that? And how do you move forward with your life that's going to impact those two kids for the rest of their lives?
All right. And I think, Chief, you said it earlier that because they probably had a pretty good financial situation, probably to the extent that someone could have left instead of same roof separation. But when there's children involved, there's also that component for mainly the mom, but also the dad. Like I don't want to wake up every morning and not see my kids. You're not going to take the kids. We're going to stay here. You talked about the mandatory reporting, and Candy, you're correct. That could almost be a dual-edged sword, right? It could create some people to say, okay, yes, I'm going to say something. Or it could create people to say, I'm not saying anything. So when I normally hear the neighbor to the east and I call, I'm not calling now because then they're going to know that I know, and then this law is going to jam me up. So, but it could create where some folks would say, listen, I'm calling because this law says that I need to and I should. Children, you have to get them in counseling. You absolutely have to get them in counseling so that someone can help them process what they've been seeing and hearing and going through. And that counseling has to sometimes be without the parents. You know what I mean? Not obviously the parents have to know that they're doing the counseling, but not having a parent in there so that the kids can speak freely. Because if it's dad sitting in there with the child, then they're going to say things that are probably favorable on dad's side, right?
Yeah.
If it's mom, it'll be that same thing. And then they're not just able to speak freely, but counseling would be imperative because there is, even with counseling, there's going to be some dynamic impact on a child. That's a lot. It's hard for adults. So it's definitely going to be a lot for a child.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to ask you two ladies this, the judge said that he on the 30th of April, he was going to be ordered to move out of the home. Now, obviously there had been reports of domestic violence inside the home before. And I just wonder if you can almost just kind of assume that here is a person who was one of the second most powerful person in the state of Virginia, as a lieutenant governor, and at some point was going to be the governor. And here's a professional. His wife is a doctor. And the judge was like, okay, I'm going to give you this amount, but I'm going to give you until the 30th of April to move out. But I just wondered if that judge had taken some other steps sooner to ensure that he was out of the home more soon before April the 30th, which he never made it. But I'm just wondering if there were some things that was going on because of who he was that gave him some privileges to stay in the home, and knowing that there are police incident reports that stated that we were at the home in January on a domestic violence call, and I want to say he had accused the wife of assaulting him, but the wife had did something very smart, and I hope a lot of women will do this who are listening to this podcast and who will listen to it afterwards. If there is domestic violence going on inside your home, put up some cameras inside your home. And that's exactly what she did. She put cameras throughout the home, and that allowed the police officers to be able to go back and look at that video footage and to show that she didn't touch him. He didn't. It was basically, it validated that she hadn't abused him at all. And so again, I just think, if these things are going on inside the home, and then somebody's going to say, well, if I put up cameras, he's just going to take them and break them. Okay. Again, you gotta do something to protect yourself. And the fact that he may not even know the camera's up, because you can go buy cameras and install cameras and you don't even know that they're there. Again, I just think, but that also documents what's going on inside the home.
I think that what happened in that situation is this man has a career with power, and that judge was taking his power away, and he knew what day his power was going to be stripped from him.
Yeah.
And he snapped. When you take an abuser's power away, they got to have the power. So the next thing is usually death.
Yeah. Well, in the fact that, again, back in 2019, he was an up and rising political figure in the state of Virginia and around the country. And you could assume that domestic violence had been going on in the home well before then. This wasn't just something that just started,
Well, and even the allegation of sexual assault with him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's something there, right?
Exactly. So ladies, the next video that I want to show is the tragic incident that really just shocked me this past weekend, probably just shocked you all and everybody around the country. What took place in Baton Rouge, where the father murdered his 7 kids and shot his wife, and somebody said his girlfriend, but another kid was ended up that was not his child was murdered. It was just a tragic situation all the way around, in the fact that there's so many unanswered questions as to why did this have to happen. And so I want to play the news clip, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Well, unimaginable. This morning's mass murder in Louisiana defies all understanding. Police confirming a father turned his gun on 7 of his own children. Holding hands, praying, shaking, trying to make sense of what happened Sunday morning. These neighbors woke up to a horror they'll never forget.
Right now, we have at least 10 individuals that were struck by gunfire last night in a domestic disturbance. 8 of these individuals are deceased. The ranges of the decedents are from 1 year of age to approximately 14 years of age. All of the deceased in this case are juveniles.
You heard people wailing when they received the news from the Shreveport, Louisiana police. Later, The news getting even worse.
I can tell you that 7 of the 8 children that were killed are believed to be his children. We are still working to determine a complete motive and understanding as to why this happened.
There's no understanding a father murdering his own children, the pain running deep.
And this is the result when someone snaps. So I'm going to ask the community, along with prayer, with every mental health consultant, counselor that is out here, this family and this community needs you. I need you. Because how do we get through this?
In total, detectives say 31-year-old Shamar Elkins shot 10 people in 3 different locations. 7 of the 8 juvenile victims were killed inside a home, the 8th on the roof while trying to escape. The 2 people who survived, police say, are Elkins' wife and girlfriend. Both shot in the head, both in critical condition.
All I can tell you today is my heart is saddened. It has brought me to my knees, and of course that's a great place to be, because then we can communicate with God.
When police moved in to arrest him, they say he carjacked a person at gunpoint. Officers gave chase, catching up to him, then shooting and killing Elkins. The multiple crime scenes, gruesome.
Imagine the first responders, the crime scene investigators, the coroners, deputy coroners, and the coroners people that go in, and they have to discover these 8 children murdered all at the same time. It just was a horrific scene out there.
And this is raw, and these are the tragedies when there are domestic violence or domestic disturbances in our community.
Now, the National Institute of Health says domestic violence killings are on the rise. In 2019, there were 1,065 domestic violence murders. 5 years later, in 2024, that number more than doubled to 2,339.
Wow.
Yeah. So what did you all, I want to hear from each of you. When that happened this past weekend, what kind of ran through your mind?
I can say that I am very empathetic to the mother, because I didn't lose 7, I lost 1. And waking up to not having your family again, that is something that lives with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So I know she's going to go through a whole lot of mental. She's going to need a lot of therapy. I go to therapy to this day. At one point, I would substitute my thoughts with alcohol, never drugs. I'm too scared of those, but but you want to just drown the pain away, the thoughts away. So that was one of my vices, and so it's gonna be a long road for her. I couldn't imagine losing 7 kids at one time.
Well, and on top of that, the physical, the pain. I mean, she has a serious gunshot wound to the head. I mean, she has to recover from that, and then the healing of trying to deal with the loss of 7 kids. Yeah. Major Parker.
Yeah, so that was my first thought. First of all, she's got to try to survive at this point, right? So she's got a critical gun injury to her head, and then once she, and I'm just going to claim it now, once she survives, now she's got a whole lot of healing. I mean, 7 children. It was 7 or 8 children. I mean, how do you?
Yeah, they had 7 kids together, and he ended up killing another kid who was his nephew. Yeah.
But the loss of a child,
Yeah.
let alone the loss of 7 children. How do you recover? I mean, that's like Candy said, a huge road to recovery for her. And that was my first thinking. I didn't think anything about why he did it, because there's no justification. So the why doesn't matter. It's just, how does she and the girlfriend, how do they move forward? How, what's life look like for them? Next steps for them.
Yeah. Well, and I think from the reports that it came out, I think the wife had filed for divorce, and so there was some separation that was getting ready to happen. And again, nobody knows why he did what he did, what triggered that. But again, to take the life of your own kids, and the youngest one was 18 months old. I just don't. And again, I think this is why and as the commissioner said it in that news report, is that this is something that's going on in the Black community, and we need to have this conversation about it. And I think to go much deeper into the conversation, this is a conversation that Black men really need to have. This isn't a Black women's problem. This is a Black men problem. And where are the leaders in the Black community to stand up? And I'm gonna get back on my soap opera about these Black churches, and I'm gonna get on my soap opera about where's the NAACP? Where are all these Black organizations who are supposed to be there for the community, but oftentimes it's more self-serving. And if they cannot be in the spotlight, they don't want to be there. But this is something that needs to happen in every community, whether it's in Arkansas, it's in Minnesota, it's in Oklahoma. Everywhere you need to have Black men coming together to have a conversation, a national conversation around domestic violence and mental health, because it is something that is not going to go away anytime soon.
But again, the leaders that you spoke of, if they brought that conversation to the table, I think that it will become a conversation. But they're not going to bring that conversation to the table.
Well, and I'm the type of person, I like to put people on the spot. And this is the thing: if you got so many mega churches. Where are these mega churches at? I'm not trying to put people on the spot, because I know a lot of people are going to end up listening to this podcast and going to say, "Oh, your name dropping, you're calling people out." But where are people like Bishop T.D. Jakes? Where are and not just again, this is a Black problem, but where are these mega preachers at, and where are these leaders in the communities at? I mean, whether you are a Black mayor, whether you are a Black person on the city council or county commissioner, or whatever it may be, if you're in a leadership position as a Black man, and even in law enforcement, Black police chief, Black sheriff, somebody needs to be saying, how do we organize and how do we get, kind of like the Million Man March? You can organize 1 million men to march to DC. Well, you can organize you can organize a march to get men to sit down and have this conversation about domestic violence and mental health. And even to have that conversation as to, you may not tell the whole crowd that, hey, I abused my wife or I abused my girlfriend, but there needs to be somebody that you can talk to get some help.
I challenge you to start it.
Well, you know what, and I think again, if you're gonna walk the walk, you need to talk the talk.
Right.
And again,
I challenge you.
Okay.
I challenge you in the city that you are in, that you get 100 men together. You got to start small.
Yeah.
I'll take the challenge and get 100 women.
Yeah. Well, and again, and now, Major Parker, I'm going to put our organization, Noble, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. We need to be having this conversation amongst Black law enforcement leaders who are very influential in our communities, to sit up and say, we've got 50 chapters around the United States. And I think every single chapter, and I'm gonna say his name. I think this is the conversation to have with Dwayne, the executive director with Noble, and Renee Hall, who is the president for Noble, to say we've got a problem going on in the Black community, and what are we doing in the Black law enforcement executives to have this conversation? I think that is a platform to help facilitate and help organize some of these things. That is a Black problem in the Black, especially with Black men. Right,
and that would be an amazing organization to do that, because, like you said, all across the country there's a Noble chapter, and on the national platform. Has there ever been a workshop on domestic violence at the
Nope.
Right.
Nope.
So,
There is no. And again, and Katie, I'm gonna get, I'm gonna get on my soap opera about this. We can have conferences every year, and these conferences about, financial wellness and all these other things, and but we're not having a meaningful conversation about domestic violence and mental health, because police officers are responding to these calls. Also, there's domestic violence that are going on inside of these homes with men and women who are in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And again, somebody needs to step up. And I think, and I'm actually going to reach out to Renee and say, hey, I think, she's going to be the outgoing president, but Davis is going to be the incoming president. Somebody needs to take on an initiative to say enough is enough, and we need to have a national conversation about domestic violence. And at our next national conference, we need to put this on a national platform to talk about.
Right. And a lot of, when you spoke about mega churches, a lot of them have resources within the church. So if you're a member of the church, and if you come to the church, there's this ministry here. You can be part of this ministry. I don't know what it looks like, but you can be part of this ministry. What about the outreach? What about if you don't come to the church? Are you still offered that same resource? And I think that's huge. My dad used to say when I was young, don't always pay attention to what the preacher preaches about, but it's what he's not
preaching about.
That's what you want to pay close attention
to. In Candy, and I think you kind of alluded to that earlier, that you got the preacher may be dealing with some domestic violence of his own inside of his own home. And go ahead.
I'm a storyteller. So let me just tell you what stopped me from going to church. I was going to this church, and everybody loved the pastor. The pastor could do no wrong. Well, the wife walked in the door and she told the pastor's gossip, and he made the news for domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if anybody had went to that pastor about domestic violence, he would have said, well, it happens in the home. That's how we keep our women in line. And so it's a scary situation, because I think domestic violence has a stigma, and it's also the quiet killer of Black women.
It is. Yeah, it is. And again, I just think, this is, as we talk about, behind closed doors, the conversation we avoid about Black mental health related to domestic violence, it is just something that you cannot just have an hour conversation about. And the fact that you can bring on counselors, you can bring on domestic violence survivors, you can bring on a host of people, and people, everybody has different resources to provide to women, and even including men. But who's going to take that first step to really to do something about it? And because again, there's a lot of organizations that are out that are trying to do the best they can do, but at the same time, if you've got in Candy and Major Parker, there's a lot of women who are just so afraid to take that next step. They're afraid to leave because, like you said, the husband is controlling of the finances. If they leave, they're not going to have a car to drive. And then if they have a job, how are they going to get to work? How are the kids going to get to daycare? There's so many things that go into a woman trying to decide to leave. And it reminds me of a movie that I saw not too long ago. And I've seen this movie. I want to say Jennifer Lopez is in this movie, where she was a victim of domestic violence. Yeah, sleeping with the enemy.
Yeah.
And what did she do? And again, I mean, she trained, she prepared, she had a plan, and the plan kind of fell apart almost, but then the plan ended up working out.
Well, that's the movie Enough.
That's a movie, yeah.
She puts on some rings and wraps her hands up, and she ends up,
and sleeping. Yeah, it was what was it? Sleeping with the
Enough.
enemy.
Enough is the name of the movie.
Yeah, Enough. Yeah, and so again, there are just so many things out there, but and Ken, I may have asked you this question before, and obviously it is the same thing: is that women are afraid to leave their homes because of the fears of what they already know is going to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, my mom had to come all the way to Chicago to say, bring your back with me, because
Yeah,
you can get things, but I can't get another you.
yeah.
You can get things. And my biggest thing was, I just bought a brand new furniture. I got a car. I got everything, and I have to start all over again. Well,
It,
that's
it
what I had to do.
well, and it's best to start over when you're alive
Right. Right.
than somebody is planning an unfortunate funeral. And the thing that happened in Baton Rouge, it was good to see I want to say that the governor's wife has some kind of foundation, and the foundation is going to cover the cost of all of the kids, the 8 kids who were murdered, their funeral expenses. And so now the family does not have to be trying to figure out about, hey, we need to get a GoFundMe account and also, trying to raise money to bury kids, because and again, the family is grieving, but what about the community? What about the community, and especially in Baton Rouge? And this is, a very predominantly Black community. How does this community recover from this tragic incident that happened? Can they? And obviously, it's going to take community leaders coming together, having a conversation about it. I mean, you have to prevent the next situation that's going to happen. And I
Right.
think that's the conversation.
And since we're having a conversation, a lot of it is our social economic dynamics. And I personally feel like I used to be the director for opioids. And the way that blew up is because kids had an overdose.
Mm-hmm.
People with money and another dynamic. And when I think if this had happened in a different culture,
Yeah.
grant funding would be everywhere.
Yeah.
I
Well,
really believe that.
yeah. Well, and it's it's true, Kenny. I mean, when you look at resources across the country, state funding related to mental health or domestic violence, and especially we're talking about this in the Black community, but another community that is so impacted is the Native American community. I mean, domestic violence is at an all-time high in the Native American community. And so, but there again, you've got people who are in control of funding to make some decisions on increasing funding for domestic violence organizations or increasing funding for mental health. And again, if you can go and spend money on a war, you can go and spend money on something that's going to benefit people and change the way people are living their lives, especially our kids. So yeah. Well, ladies, this is a conversation we can continue to have for another hour, but we're past our time a little bit. But again, I think this is something that we need to have this conversation tonight, and we need to have it again. And Candy, I'm going to take you up on that, and I'm going to reach out because again, I want to be able to use this platform in a meaningful way to help bring about a conversation about something that we need to have a conversation about. And if somebody tells me, "Oh, well, Chief, I don't think we really want to do that," well, why? Now you're becoming the problem. You're not becoming the solution. You're becoming a part of the problem. And again, I think bringing in survivors of domestic violence into those spaces and letting these men and women talk and share what they experience is going to really help move things much forward.
I agree. So I'll be looking for something on the Noble platform after you reach out.
I'm definitely going to start making some calls and talking to some people, and until somebody tells me, "Oh, Chief, we're not going to do that," well, tell me why, because this is a problem. Don't let me get in front of MSNBC or CNN talk about it and say, oh, well, you know what?
I asked Noble.
I asked Noble and they said, no, we're not going to do that. Or I reached out to the NAACP and they were like, oh, no, we don't want to. This is a Black problem. What better organizations who are so well recognized who should be leading this conversation?
Correct.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Well, again, I want to thank you both and Major Parker definitely for reaching out to me. And, you know, we had talked about getting you on the podcast during Black History Month, Women History Month, because in there, Candi, she's a trailblazer. She's the first Black woman to rise to the level of a major in Des Moines, Iowa Police Department. And so there are so many young women who can look up to Major Parker and say, if she did it, I can do it. You know,
and Chief, actually, I'm the first Black officer, male.
So male or female.
So just thank you so much.
All the way around.
Yeah.
And we're going to get you back on it just to talk about, even if it's not Black History Month or Women History Month, I want to get you on to talk about your career, because again, you know, I had on 2 ladies who were constables in Texas. And one is she is the longest serving Black constable in the history of Texas.
Wow.
And then there was another Black female who was the first Black constable in Baxter County, which is in the San Antonio area. But nobody knew that. These 2 women really didn't know who each other. One is on this side of the state of Texas and the other one is on the other side. And they didn't know that until they finally met each other.
Wow.
Yeah. And so but I definitely want to get you to, you know, come back on and talk about your career and in some of the things that you did as you rose through the ranks with the Des Moines, Iowa Police Department, because it is a city that I pass through quite often in my travels between Oklahoma and Minnesota.
But you're not stopping, huh?
Only time I stop is at Cane's Chicken and to get some gas.
Okay.
But
I'd be honored. I'd be honored to be
on. Yeah. But I told what is it
Captain Brown?
Yeah, Captain Brown. I told him, I said, man, one of these times I come through there, I'm gonna have to call you before I get into town and try to meet you somewhere. So
yes.
Yeah. So
well, thank you again for having me.
All right, and thank you for reaching out. And Candi, as always, thank you for coming on and talking about this. And we'll definitely get together again. And we're going to have a follow-up on this conversation about behind closed doors, the conversation about Black men, mental health, and domestic violence. So, ladies, thank you. And make sure you tune in next Thursday for another episode of You and the Law podcast. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay.
That's a wrap on this episode of You and the Law podcast. We've got more eye-opening conversations and hard-hitting insights coming your way, so make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and stay ready, because the next episode might just change the way you see law enforcement forever.